Chapter 2. A beautiful bird slayer. Matthias sat in the back of the carriage, staring out of the window. His butler, Hessen, briefed him about the pending problems of his family. He responded to Hessen's words with just quick nods or brief replies. The business was run by the directors, and although Matthias' mother and grandmother were in charge of the family affairs, it was up to him as the Duke of Herhart to make the final decision. Matthias had been playing that role since he was a child of 12. Hessen's report had ended by the time Matthias arrived on the Platanus road leading to the Herhart estate. Matthias was seated with his head tilted at an angle, gazing at the familiar scenery. Both sides of the roadway were lined with tall trees that were arched as if they were holding hands. The path was embroidered with an exquisite pattern designed by the shattered sunlight, leaping through the fluttering leaves. A white mansion with a blue-colored rooftop revealed itself after passing through the road into the estate. Outside the front entrance, the mother and grandmother were waiting for their family patriarch. The door to the wagon opened as Matthias straightened the position of his already linear tie. "Welcome home, Matthias." Norma Katharina von Herhart, Dowager Duchess of Arvis, smiled brightly when she welcomed her grandson. Matthias bowed his head and accepted a kiss from his grandmother. He was approached with a much more straightforward attitude by Elise von Herhart, his mother, who stood behind them. "You've grown taller," she chuckled as she embraced him warmly. Her dark black hair gleamed in the early summer light, much like her son's. Matthias responded to his mother with the same smile. He shared similar greetings with the other servants in line. His polished manner and proper courtesy towards the servants showed that he was the perfect owner of this family. He was Duke Herhart. Matthias took the lead and crossed the lobby area. Standing between his two beloved women, he suddenly lifted his head and stared up at the huge chandelier that was lit up in the middle of the day before climbing the stairs. He was a Herhart. Herhart, a euphemism for intellect, grace, and unflappable character. Matthias had never had any complaints or concerns regarding his own life. He was well aware of the kind of life he would have to live and accepted it. Handling his own life was as easy as breathing for him. Matthias ascended the stairwell with long strides, with his eyes fixed on the ground. The servants were finally able to breathe properly after the owner of the household entered the mansion safely. The residents of Arvis had been preparing for days to meet Duke Herhart in person. On his arrival, everything and everyone, including the people who lived in his estate, had to be flawless. The servants needed to present themselves in the best light possible. Did the Duke already arrive? Standing at the edge of the group of servants, Layla murmured something in a disappointed tone. The creamy white-colored dress Bill had purchased for her flapped in sync with her movements. "You'll see Duke Herhart in the woods, but I have to ask for permission first." Bill Remmer spoke bluntly and began walking towards the woods. Layla followed him at the back with zeal. "Does the Duke enjoy the woods as much as I do?" "Well, yeah, sure. Hunting is one of his favorite activities." "Hunting? In the woods?" Layla's pupils dilated and her eyes widened. As he looked down at the child, Bill snorted. "Isn't it natural for the forest to be the hunting ground for this family? Then, does he hunt birds too?" "Upland hunting is the Duke's favorite pastime." His irrelevant comment caused Layla to halt in her stride. Bill coughed reflexively after realizing what he had said. He tried lying to her to convince her, but Duke Herhart was due to arrive on the hunting grounds in a few days. He was concerned that if he tried to comfort the child with his white lies, he would cause Layla even more distress. "When you see the Duke's shooting skills, you'll be astonished. He's only a teenager, but he's a fantastic sharpshooter." Bill started to babble, because he felt compelled to say something to comfort the young girl. But Layla, on the other hand, was on the verge of crying. "Why does he like killing birds? There's lots of food in the mansion. Hunting is merely a means of recreation for the nobles. The most entertaining targets to shoot are birds, and..." Bill turned around to face Layla after realizing what he had said, and Layla's upset expression came into his gaze. "Why do you like birds so much?" Bill was on the verge of yelling something at the top of his lungs. He didn't understand why he was bothering to explain something to her, while still having to be sensitive to the child's feelings. Bill eventually chose to remain silent because Layla seemed to be about to cry if he said even one more word. The sobbing Layla. He hated seeing children crying. Bill continued to walk again after a brief pause. Layla's shoulders were limp as she followed in his footsteps. The same child who had been excited to wear her new ivory-colored dress was gone. It had been quite a sight to see her feeling so agitated about the dress she just received. I'm hoping the Duke shows a dislike for hunting. After a long period of silence, she spoke up cautiously. Or maybe he'll get tired of hunting. Layla looked up at Bill, her eyes sparkling with hope, but Bill could only scratch the back of his neck sheepishly as a response. Layla was optimistic that her prayers would be fulfilled. Matthias was nowhere to be found near the hunting grounds a week after his return. He was busy tending to the guests who had flocked to the mansion to see him, so it was understandable. The mansion was filled with clamorous parties every day, but the woods were deafeningly quiet. As the summer had come to an end, the eggs hatched, and the wild roses, which had been in the early stages of flowering, were now wholly bloomed. Layla was enthralled by the minor changes taking place in the woods. Layla, don't go too far. Bill raised his voice when Layla excitedly left the cottage. All right, I'm just going for a stroll along the river. Uncle, I'll see you later. As she turned around, Layla swung her arms frantically above her head. Her old leather bag, which she slung over her shoulder, shook along with her as she jumped. Layla was the first person to discover the newly hatched birds on a tree branch. The hairless baby birds were eagerly awaiting their mother's arrival with their food. She scampered down from the tree and drew the picture of the baby birds on a scrap of paper, which she pulled from her leather bag. Although her sketches were a little messy, she tried her hardest to portray the tiny birds in her drawings. In her little diary, Layla drew and wrote about everything she had seen in the woods. The land was more majestic than any other location she had ever seen. Layla decided to jot down everything she saw. This was because she wanted to look back on her memories from the woods in her diary. After her departure from this mansion, she was saddened by the thought of leaving the place one day. Layla kept a steady record of the forest. The sun was just starting to settle when she arrived at the glistening riverbank. Layla climbed to the peak of a giant tree that stood at the forest's edge, overlooking the river. A faint clink of horseshoes could be heard from afar when Layla held her breath while hugging the tree branch she was lying down on. On its back there was a man. He chose to rest his horse right under the tree, where Layla was lying among all the places in the woods. From the moment that man had stepped off the horse, his movements had been smooth and light. She thought it best to climb down, but the mysterious man was already leaning against the tree. Layla couldn't think of anything else to say, so she just looked at the man who was lifting his hand to remove his hat. But at that moment, Layla's leather bag fell off her shoulders and slammed into the branch. For the next few seconds, her memory became hazy. The man reflectively turned his head towards the tree branch and met eyes with Layla. Layla locked her gaze with his. His blue eyes were like clear glass beads, visible through the thick black hair that flowed over his forehead. By the time she tried to gather herself together, the man was already pointing his gun at her face. The thought of being shot by the long, menacing gun made Layla's face turn pale. She remained motionless, hugging the tree as though it were her only friend. Her entire body was trembling with sweat. Slowly, the man lowered his pistol and let out a silent sigh. "Who are you?" His twisted lips emitted a low, resonant voice. "Layla." As her golden hair fluttered in the wind, Layla managed to keep her voice from breaking, even though she was on the verge of tears. "What?" His pupils dilated even further, and Layla hugged the tree so tightly that it hurt her fingertips. "Layla, I'm Layla Llewellyn. Uncle, Uncle Bill." The sound of Layla's cry echoed through the woods. Bill sat in front of his cottage warehouse, watching the sun setting down. At Layla's frantic call, he turned his head in bewilderment and looked at Layla, who ran towards him with a crimson-red face. "What's the matter?" "There's a man in the woods." He was very tall. His hair was jet black, and his eyes were a deep shade of blue. His voice sounded as light as a feather. Bill smirked with a snarl. "Without a doubt, it's Duke Herhart." Layla stood in front of Bill, trying to catch her breath. For a while, the stunning yet scary man in the distance had stared at Layla, and then turned away without saying anything. When he mounted his horse again, two more men appeared in the dense forest. The man turned his horse and followed the other two men further into the woods. When they were no longer visible, bang! A cold shot suddenly rang out. Startled, Layla turned her head towards the source of the noise. She soon witnessed surprised birds arising from the far side of the woods. One of the birds fell from the trees, with its wings drooped helplessly. The shots went on for a couple more rounds, so Bill patted Layla on her shoulder to comfort the frightened child. Everyone in the estate, including Bill Remmer, praised him for being the epitome of royalty. Matthias von Herhart, who had exceptional qualities as the owner of this duchy, seemed to be loved and cared for by the people, but not Layla. The mother bird had been missing since the day the Duke went out hunting. The newly hatched baby birds were separated from their mother, who fed them with food. Moreover, countless birds were no longer to be seen in the woods. Why did the Duke only hunt the tiny, beautiful birds instead of big, edible ones? Layla, who had been watching and agonizing over this for the past month, seemed to have figured out why. For Duke Herhart, the birds had become his moving target. The smaller they were, the more challenging and fascinating it was to shoot them. The Duke didn't even try to glance at the prey he had just killed. After hitting his target, he would simply turn away, and Layla would always bury the dead birds that were soaked in blood. The beautiful bird slayer. Layla Llewellyn decided to give him that title.